Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm your PhD of politics, Dr. Stephen Coleman, and welcome to Coleman and Company's 31st Political Pundit Night, exclusively on mytwintears.com. Folks, American politics American politics gone insane? That's the topic of discussion tonight. When you think of it, the January 6th situation, Congressman Santos, the Long Island congressman, the border crisis, both the southern border and more our border with Canada, we have that situation, police violence on the streets of Memphis as well as other cities, and what looks like President Trump could very well be indicted by a grand jury that's been meeting in Manhattan. So all of that and so much more leads to the question, American politics, has it gone insane? We have a great panel this evening. Let me just mention who's on the panel. Dr. Richard Dozier, author, pastor, and educator. He's coming live and direct from outside of Houston, Texas. That's great. We have this Zoom. You can go all over the country and the world. Susan Betts-Tatoma is with us. She's an attorney and a pastor. Rodney Strange, Chemung County legislator, 15th District, Republican Rodney Strange. Deborah Lynch, political activist and environmentalist. Steve Sprague is here. He's a former congressional staffer, former Star Gazette reporter, and former local television journalist. Since his television journalism was on a competing outlet, I won't mention the outlet, but has those credentials. It's great that Steve is here. Georgia Verdier, the Elmira Corning NAACP president, is with us. Dr. Joseph Kolosinski, associate professor at Elmira College and political analyst. Great to have Dr. Professor Kolosinski with us. Tom Santulli, former Chemung County executive, is here tonight. The Reverend Nathaniel Wright, pastor of the Calvary Baptist Church in Ithaca, and also he's the former pastor of the Friendship Baptist Church in Corning. And Jeff Murray, veteran journalist for the Star Gazette and the USA Today Network. I consider Jeff Murray to be the Dean of Journalism in the Twin Tiers. I want to start off this evening by asking each person to spend 2 minutes or less to address the question, has American politics gone insane? So let's start off with Dr. Richard Dozier, author, pastor, educator. Dr. Dozier, has politics gone insane in America?
Thank you for having me on, Dr. Coleman. Well, when we look at American politics and when we look at it historically, and I can only go back but so many years for myself, but when we look at the McCarthy era, in the 1940s and the 50s, while then, communism, and so there was craziness then. Then we could pick up with Strom Thurmond and those who were the segregationists who were in American politics, and we still see that exploding around the country. Not segregation, but racism. And so we have some wild things going on today. I mean, where but in American politics can you have a U.S. congressman call the president of the U.S. during the address a liar? And so we have some crazy things going on. We have crazy people in Congress. How can we, the people of American citizens, trust our congresspersons when they can see a insurrection right before them and say, oh no, they're only visitors to the Capitol? So how can we trust these Congress people today? I think one of the things, it's always been there, but in today's time, we now have the news that is covering it. We can see it live on television. Not only is it broadcast in America, but around the world. Fortunately, they're not throwing shoes at one another like they do in other countries, but our politics it's just crazy. It's just outrageous.
Thank you, Dr. Dozier. Each person will talk for 2 minutes or less on the question on American politics. Has it gone insane? And then after that, we'll have a discussion. So keep in mind what other people are saying so we can have some debate and discussion very soon. Next up, for 2 minutes or less, so the 2-minute introduction, opening statement. She's an attorney, so Susan Betch-Tatoma, pastor and attorney. Susan, your opening statement.
Thank you, Steve, for having me on. I believe that American politics, as Dr. Dozier said, has always been a little crazy and insane. But the difference now is the cancel culture and the acceptability of it. Back when things were going rough, at least in my lifetime, whether it was in the 60s and the civil rights protests and, all of the justifiable unrest that we've had in this country, people did not stop talking to friends and family as a normal part of culture. I suppose there were always people who may have done that, but now it is almost expected that if you disagree with someone, if they voted for someone you didn't vote for, then maybe you shouldn't go to Thanksgiving dinner, or maybe you shouldn't be friends with them anymore. And it's important to keep the dialogue going, because if we don't keep the dialogue going, it's going to just get more and more crazy. And I fear for the future of our country if we don't settle down a little bit and start talking to each other again instead of engaging in cancel culture regarding politics.
Attorney Susan Betch-Tatoma, also a pastor in Corning, with her opening statement. Republicans and Democrats, kind of like the Hatfields and the McCoys these days. Next up, for his 2-minute opening statement, Rodney Strange, Chemung County legislator, 15th District, a Republican. Rodney Strange.
I absolutely believe it's gone insane. And it's not just between the two political parties anymore. I mean, I was chairman of the county Republican Party for 8 years, and I had an awful lot of infighting within the Republican Party. People, for example, Tom Reed was our congressman. He was a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus. I had other county chairs who were angry with Tom Reed because he was a member of that committee, because they did not want him working with Democrats to get things done. I had local Republicans here in Chemung County attacking other Republicans. As chair, I always subscribe to Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment: do not say ill things of other Republicans. And it's not just, like I said, between Republicans and Democrats anymore. It's within the parties, and the Democrats have it too, between the progressives and the moderates. The debate anymore isn't "I'm right, you're wrong." It's "I'm right and you're stupid." There's no middle ground anymore. You can't disagree with someone and then be friends afterwards. I mean, we all remember Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan having vigorous debates and then going out for a beer after hours. We don't have that anymore, and it's unfortunate. When I run for office, I run as a Republican, but I also run on an independent line called 15th District United, because I want the people in my district to know, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, independents, liberals, to know that I represent all of them. And I get criticized by some people for doing that. So, yeah, I think that it's insane on both sides of the political aisle.
Thank you, Rodney Strange, county legislator, Chemung County legislator from the 15th District. And on this program, we're talking about politics going crazy. It's not only national politics, but what about state and local politics? I'm not in a position to have all the information, but it seems to me sometimes in Chemung County, it's County Executive Chris Moss against the world. There's all kinds of debate going back and forth in terms of county politics and what the county wants to do in terms of the legislature and what Chris Moss wants to do, and so on and so on. Maybe we'll get into that and a lot more later. Deborah Lynch is here. Deborah is a lifelong political activist and environmental activist. I appreciate Deborah being here. Deborah Lynch, opening statement.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman, for having me on your program. I enjoyed doing this. And I like listening to other people go first. I get good pointers from other people. And everything that has been said is on point, in my opinion. But one of the things I think that's driving our political discourse, unfortunately, and it is usually the root of all evil, is money. And when I say that, I'm talking about the Citizens United decision that happened in 2010. And the fact that we now have unlimited campaign contributions going to people from basically 100. If you drill it down, it's like 100 people that donate to super PACs and then basically donate to all the candidates. And I don't care what side of the aisle, they're going to take the money, because to run a successful campaign, especially at a congressional level, usually requires, even in upstate New York, between $2 and $5 million. Nobody can do that without going to these PACs. And unfortunately, to me, when that happens, you kind of are selling your soul a little bit. And it creates a lot of discourse, because you're kind of beholden to that person or people that have donated this money. And until that goes away and we get control of that campaign finance, you're going to have a lot of this political discourse, and average everyday people like the rest of us aren't going to be able to run in those type of campaigns because we don't have the money. So I think that that's one of the things we have to start with, in my opinion, to try to get control of this. And it's true on both sides. They all do it. And it's sad to me.
Yeah. Deborah Lynch, I know we'll talk about this more a little bit later, but some say that the Citizens United decision kind of ruined our democracy. Is that hyperbole, or is there a lot?
Oh, no. It's on point, in my opinion. I remember Charlie Young looking at me saying, "It's too late. It's too late." And that was even before Citizens United, because he passed away. Well, he passed away shortly after that, but he was having some dementia and stuff. But he knew, he could see it. He could see how the large corporations that are owned by basically 100 people were controlling our elections. And in order to have fair and honest elections where where the discourse doesn't get so heated and so debated, you have to be able to allow everyday people like the rest of us to run, to bring in new ideas and new, So yes, I think our democracy is in peril.
Yeah, there are a lot of folks, or many folks, that have said for decades that elections in America have always been a symbolic exercise to legitimize the status quo. A political scientist named Murray Edelman has put forth that thesis over the years. Thanks, Deborah. I know we'll be hearing more from you as we move on.
Yes, and I want to thank the people on this call that are in and have been in the news, because, without people truth telling like you're doing tonight, nothing changes. So.
Steve Sprague is a former congressional staffer, a former Star Gazette reporter, and a former local television journalist, reporter, anchor, the whole schmeal. Steve, welcome to Political Pundit Night. What did I leave out in terms of your background?
Well, you left out the fact that I am a political Pollyanna. I'm still a strong believer in the values we started with. But I also want to echo my thanks to you, Dr. Coleman, for inviting me, and to all of our colleagues on this broadcast who contribute their time and energy to what is certainly a very valuable public exchange. Now, to the question. Is it insane? I don't know. That suggests mental illness. I see two other problems present. One would be a virus, and that's rabies. It seems to have taken over and created an awful lot of angry politicians, angry for not much reason. The second one would be a dissolution of a lot of our political standards into what is beginning to look frighteningly like a cult. The following of an individual, regardless of what that person does. And then when you add in the constant desire for maintaining office and trying to please the biggest crowd, that's a bad combination. I went to the House of Representatives to work for a Democrat in 1976. I worked for 2 Republicans in the House after that. And I think I'm happy to be away from Washington now.
Steve, for the folks that are watching right now, which congressman do you work for in the House of Representatives?
Well, I was working at the Star Gazette when Stan Lundeen was elected in March of 1976 in the special election. He asked me to go to Washington with him as his press secretary. After 2 terms, I went to work for a fellow named Gary Lee from the Dryden area, a Republican. And then my last 6 years on the Hill, I worked with an Oregon congressman. His name was Bob Smith. He was a cattle rancher. And then I left for another criminal career as a registered lobbyist with the National Association. But I did finish, I think, at least trying to restore things. I spent 20 years with, or 19 and a half years with the headquarters of Transportation Security Administration.
Mm-hmm. Well, Steve, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. I know we'll be hearing a lot more from you as the evening progresses. Next up, with her opening statement, is Georgia Verdier, the Elmira Corning NAACP president. Georgia Verdier.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Coleman, for this relevant question. Has American politics gone insane? And in my opening statement, my opinion is American politics are rather chaotic. However, some politicians have gone insane. And I want to walk you through why I'm making that statement. As on a daily basis, we can hear their negative verbiage and see their negative behavior playing out on center stage. They appear consumed with reckless verbiage, turning people against the government, the FBI, the Justice Department, and one another. Some appear to be suffering from perception problems and emotional instability. Their behavior seems to be shaped by their political ideology as they focus more on chasing conspiracy theories than reality, supporting lies and fighting over pointless issues. Many are fighting to protect guns, and I'm talking about assault weapons, and remove books from classrooms and libraries in an offer to hide or erase history. And reportedly, there are more guns in America than people. So there's no record, according to my knowledge, of books killing kids, but guns have killed thousands. Some politicians are irrelevant, therefore seemingly behave in ways only to get media coverage, negative or positive, versus effective leadership. And we all know that negative news sells. We're all sailing on America's political ship, and we're all responsible for its cargo. If it sinks, we all go down. Therefore, we all have a responsibility to keep the ship afloat and possibly change its course by making our votes count and our voices heard. So what does this mean? It means that we must be aware of the definition of political insanity, because if not, we the people might be main contributors to it. So what is political insanity? It is the expectation that if we keep voting for those already in office, things will be different following their re-election. But things have always remained, in my opinion, the same, or they've even gotten worse. So we need to wake up and watch how the wind is blowing. In the past, I wondered who would vote for some of these politicians that are currently on the scene. But I quickly realized that some people might not be interested in effective leadership, but rather other ingredients these individuals have in their duffel bags, such as division, dishonesty, lies, and hate. I would say to these negative politicians that division and hate will never make America great, because unity and love are our key power gates. I do not believe that the majority of Americans fit into a negative category, so hear me right. So we, the people, have the power to change the course of the political ship by declaring that enough is enough and changing our voting behavior. In theory, elected officials are supposed to represent the taxpayers and be responsive to our needs and concerns. However, if we want our voices heard and our desire to determine our own quality of life, we, the people, must make it happen. Those are my opening statements.
Thank you, Georgia Verdier, President of the local branch of the NAACP. Thanks for the opening statement, Georgia Verdier, President Verdier. And, one thing is that when it comes to one definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That's the Einstein definition of insanity. One thing that's interesting is most people hate the Congress. You ask people what they think of the Congress, they hate it. But you ask people about their local representative, they'll say, oh yeah, she's great or he's great. And one of the reasons for that is the constituent work that a lot of local representatives are engaged with. As a congressman or a congresswoman, it's not only making laws, it's also constituent service. That's a big part of the job. Time now to move on to the next opening statement. I'd like to welcome Dr. Joseph Kolosinski, Associate Professor at Elmira College and political analyst. He has been an observer of the political scene for a long time. Dr. Joseph Kolosinski, your opening statement.
Oh, thank you, Steve, for having me. And honestly, I remember when you asked me to be here and we were talking on the phone, you said, has American politics gone insane? And of course, my first thought was, well, of course it has, obviously. But I had to go back and think about the question. And, thinking back, the 1876 election actually was stolen. Andrew Jackson freely spoke about hanging his vice president. In the 1930s, we had U.S. Congress people literally mailing Nazi propaganda with taxpayer money. But I think, the standard for insanity is probably our own baseline. And I started becoming aware of politics in the 1970s, which was pretty civil, right? I mean, Ray LaHood talked about being in Congress, and he said that, people went there to get things done. And the way to get things done was the art of compromise. It is so different now. It is venal. There are no friendships across the aisle. It's hard to see the two parties coming together on anything. And it seems like all of those things that happened, that I referenced are happening all at once. There's kill Mike Pence. These are, false claims that the 2020 election was stolen. There's, actual insurrectionists. But I think a piece of this is you have to think a thing that happened right after Trump was elected president is I started seeing people on social media talking about how, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. Because, of course, republics are run by a smaller percentage of the country. But, this is nonsense. And elections really at this point, and this is a symptom of it, have become a game about who's going to win and not about trying to figure out what the American people want. And I think that is a sort of malignancy that is driving a lot of what we're seeing today. And And so, what we have here, this conversation, it sounds like a diagnosis. I'd really like to move on to talking about the treatment.
Well, Joseph, I look forward to that discussion as we move on this evening. Remember years ago, I read a book by a political scientist. His name was James Q. Wilson. And one of the points he made was the major aim of any politician is to win. That's it. And once a politician wins, the next major aim of a politician is to get reelected. It seems that we had that approach in steroids, on steroids at this point, in terms of people winning at all costs, lying, cheating, all kinds of things, making things up. So, American politics, maybe it's berserk. American politics has gone berserk, my friends, perhaps. Tom Santulli is a great mind, the former Chemung County executive, for years, TV analyst and commentator on WETM television. Tom Santulli, very smart when it comes to government and local government. I consider him sort of a local Eric Severide, to bring in someone from the past who did commentary and analysis at the national level. Tom Santulli, I hope comparing you to Eric Severide is okay. Tom, your opening statement.
It works for me, Steve. A lot has been said, and it's really quite sad when you look and see how this democracy was formed, and what a government that we created that was the envy of the world. It really was. The fact that I say this every time we get together, that we can sit here tonight and talk about these things. If we were in China or Russia, they probably would drag us out of our chairs right now and throw us in a cell for even expressing our opinion. And when I look at where we were years ago, because it was said earlier, there's always been fighting among politicians. I mean, that started since day one. But that people would fight over issues. But in the end, no matter which way it came out, people usually still got together and treated people with respect. And I think that's the word that has been lost in politics for years. No one has any respect for anyone. They say anything that's on their mind. They don't care how rotten it is or how mean it is. They just say it. The public, I think, has been turned off for years. As we know, most voters are no longer Republicans. They're not Democrats. The majority of voters are now blanks, which is a big sign that they're happy with what we're doing. The other problem is, and I felt this way all the years that I was in office, and I was in for a long time, there's a lot of nuts. There just are. You can sugarcoat it any way you want it, but there are a lot of nuts in politics. And they have a lot of power. When you think about it, to become a politician, to take an important office, whether it's the local level or at a federal level, there's not much for qualifications. It's age. You run for office, and if you win, you get a lot of power, even if you don't know a lot, or if you're not a person that's socially sound. So what we've watched, I think, is a great decline. I think it got worse under Trump, and I'll say that as a Republican. I think even though there was a lot of hatred out there, I think a lot of that 24-hour spin and not showing respect for other people, I think it's turned a lot of people off. A lot of people don't vote. We're one of the worst voting countries. Think about this, a democracy. We're one of the worst voting countries in the world, where people just don't vote. And I think that's part of the crisis. And I'm not sure, presidents love to say this, every one of them, and Biden said it not just too long ago, the best days are ahead of us. I'm 74 years old now. I'm not so sure that that's correct. I think our best days may be behind us. I'm not sure if we can put this back together. Money, and it was said earlier, money drives everything. And the only God that there is in politics is the God of winning. politicians, in my estimation, at this point in time, the only time that they really care about their constituents is that 6 months prior to the election, especially at the state and federal level. Otherwise, you don't hear much from anybody. I mean, the one thing about local politics that I loved is, when you went to Wegmans, people pulled you over. If you went to the mall, people pulled you over. People stopped me on the street and they got in your face. When you're at the national and state level, you can kind of play it pretty low and you don't get a lot of contact with people. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. And quite frankly, this country is starving for some new leadership of people that really care about America.
Tom Santulli, thank you for your opening statement. One thing that's going on, I think, too, is there's a lot of the cockamammies, a lot of nuts, a lot of verbal bomb tossers out there, and they sit in their kitchen with a computer and say all kinds of things about people, and with no responsibility. They just toss bombs. They're the cockamammies. And, I think if you're in the media or you're a public figure at all, they're out there. The cockamammies are out there. And it's really, it's kind of sad. But everybody now is an expert who has a computer, for better or for worse. And so politics has gone downhill. And we have what de Tocqueville once said, the tyranny of the majority, barbarians and fools that can say anything they want, when they want, with no responsibility. And I say that knowing that some of those barbarians and fools are watching me right now. And one of the things they do is they toss bombs, the cockamammies, and they oftentimes don't think. It's the kind of thing where they attack people personally, but really don't give any reason. And that is happening more and more in American politics. More and more politicians are acting like cockamammies, bomb tossers, and so on. So everything seems to have gone downhill in the United States in terms of the public discourse. Now, what I'm saying, one might, I think, fairly say, well, this is an exaggeration. You're exaggerating too much. And the answer to that is, yeah, but there's a lot of truth to the exaggeration, believe me. Next up, in terms of his opening statement, is the Reverend Nathaniel Wright. He's the pastor of the Calvary Baptist Church in Ithaca and former pastor of the Friendship Baptist Church in Corning. Reverend Wright, your opening statement.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman, as always, for the invitation. And I certainly do agree with a lot of what has been said. I think Georgia's point that it may not be insanity as much as it is chaotic. And the chaos of it all makes it difficult for those who are not engaged in politics, for the non-politicians, to really get a handle on what's going on, right? So with the media cycle and everything, it is important then to just present political theater as opposed to activity. So I just say whatever I need to say so that I can stay on the news, so I can get trending on social media sites, and I can keep myself popular for, as Deborah Lynch mentioned, so that I can raise more money, right? And so that the cycle can continue. So in politics, we're no longer solution oriented. We are just there to stake our claim to our particular point of view, and it doesn't matter if anything ever gets solved, right? It doesn't matter if anything gets better. It doesn't matter if we make changes or adjustments to healthcare. It doesn't matter if we deal with anything with Social Security. It doesn't matter if we do anything with the environment, as long as we continue to keep the political machine going, which means that people end up losing faith in institutions. And as that faith in institutions continues to dwindle, then as a politician, I can stake my claim to talking about in disparaging ways the very institutions that I'm trying to be a part of, right? It is, down with, Congress as I run for Congress, right? It is government is terrible as I want to figure out how to become a part of it, not to fix anything, not even to make it smaller, not even a matter of efficiency, but just to gum up the works. And so as trust in institutions continue to be lower, I think a lot of what we see, I do think that more often than not, I don't think that politicians have the type of relationships that they used to have. But unfortunately, I do think that many of them are friends across the aisle, which means that what we are seeing is simply political theater, right? That because we're not actually getting anything done. And so it is whatever I need to say on camera, whatever I need to say in media, whatever I need to say to whatever news outlet, and then behind closed doors, we can hang out and we can have a good time. And so the loser in all of it ends up being the American people.
Thank you, Reverend Wright, for the opening statement. I agree. What we end up with is political paralysis in America. I want to turn now to Jeff Murray. Jeff is a veteran journalist for the Star Gazette and the USA Today Network, has a background also in broadcasting and radio. He's been on the beat in the Twin Tiers for decades. I call him the dean of journalism in the Twin Tiers. Jeff Murray, you've been listening to all this from your perspective as a journalist. What say you?
Now, Dr. Coleman, I have, like you said, I have been listening, and I've heard a lot of very valid points made. As a journalist, I can tell you that the landscape is a lot different now than it was when I started 43 years ago. I think a lot of it is a perception issue. Back when I started, you had 3 major national news networks. You had a couple of major national news magazines and influential newspapers. You had local TV, radio, newspaper, and that's where you got your news. I think the politics has kind of mirrored what's been going on in society in general over the last several decades. And I think what we're seeing is more of a voyeuristic society. These days you've got, in addition to the news networks, you've got all kinds of cable news networks and their 24-hour news cycle. You've got the internet, and you've got all kinds of websites, some that provide straight news, some that are lean conservative or lean liberal. You've got bloggers out there. You've got these days, just about everybody has a cell phone, and so you can see things unfolding in real time that you couldn't even dream of that sort of thing 40, 50 years ago. And as a result, a lot of political deal making and discussions and arguments that used to take place behind closed doors are now happening right out in the open where everybody can see them. And I think to some extent there has always been a fair amount of acrimony in politics. Maybe you didn't see it as much in the old days, because, like I said, people, they might. I have read stories back in the early days of the country where the fights would break out in legislative chambers, and so there's always been a certain level of insanity. But these days, anything like that happens. You've got C-SPAN, you've got all the other outlets where everything that happens is right there for everybody to see. So it just seems a lot more real. Maybe things are a little more insane, but I think a lot of that is a perception. It seems more insane because we're seeing all of it in real time, and we didn't see that 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, I think you're making some really great points, and want to go on with some discussion, but before that I want to mention the next Pundit night will be Thursday night, July 20th from 7 until 9. So again, July 20th, a Thursday night from 7 to 9 will be the next Pundit night exclusively on mytwintiers.com. I appreciate mytwintiers.com and Nexstar Broadcasting and WETM for airing these Dr. Coleman Political Pundit Nights, Coleman and Company Political Pundit Nights. I think there's nothing like it, and it's a great cybercast opportunity to have these forums. Now, somebody at this point might say, any other events besides the July 20th political pundit night? And the answer is yes. May 13th is something I think that's big. Something big that's going to happen on May the 13th. There's going to be a Twin Tiers Unity in the Community rally at Centerway Square in Corning. You know, this is a rally to celebrate what we have in common rather than what separates us. And it's going to be great to have that in Centerway Square in Corning. Let's celebrate our unity, the power of unity that we have. I'm co-sponsoring this event with the Elmira Corning branch of the NAACP, talking about events and the NAACP. Georgia Verdier, I understand you're working on something. Could you fill us in?
We're going to have a membership luncheon at the Clarion Inn in Elmira on Saturday, this coming Saturday at 12 o'clock. And we'd love to have all of you show up and join us. We'll just be thanking our members and asking others to join us and just have a celebration of membership. So have a dynamic speaker there coming in. And it's going to be a short program. We won't keep you all day, but we'd love to have you join us.
Okay, that would be that'd be terrific. And we were talking the other day, Georgia, and you mentioned something in the community called the Block, and helping people. What's that about, the Block?
Okay, that is many people in Elmira are probably familiar with His Haven. With Julia was the CEO there, and they are opening up a unit for the homeless. It's called the Block, and the homeless will be able to go in there and get a shower, get a haircut, and just get cleaned up. And the community will be helping to supply that unit. They're asking for towels and linens and lotions and things of that nature. And so we are putting the word out everywhere we have a Zoom to let people know that I think it's an ideal thing for the homeless, because that's a problem for me in terms of veterans being homeless. That should never happen. So they are doing something about it, and the NAACP will donate the barber's chair so they can go there and get a haircut and get cleaned up. And then they're coordinating it with the local laundry so they can wash clothes, a couple of times a week. So it sounds like a wonderful idea, and it's in Elmira, and it's called His Haven.
Okay, thanks, Georgia. The executive producer of the Dr. Coleman and Company Political Pundit Nights is Dennis Sweeney, a veteran of broadcasting and journalism in the Twin Tiers. The WETM executive co-producers, David Sorensen, who does a great job, and Lisa Sturdivant. And again, welcome to the 31st Political Pundit Night, cybercasting with something to say. Okay, we've had all kinds of ideas, all kinds of viewpoints articulated so far. Let's start talking about what people have been saying and what do you think? Dr. Dozier, what say you, Dr. Richard Dozier?
Yeah, reflecting back on what Steve Sprague said, he said it's not mental illness. But I think, I see racism, white supremacy as mental illness. For you to be coming down on somebody based on the color of their skin or denying them because of that, or because you feel greater than them, to me, that is a mental illness. And when we look at pathological liars, like George Santos, a pathological liar, but yet when we have McCarthy, who is standing behind him and saying, well, I'm not going to do anything, Kevin McCarthy, I think this is a problem that we have in our Congress. I think it is being insane to support an individual like that. And even those who are voting for them, to me, those who are voting for Kevin McCarthy back in office, when they're just going for these power grabs, as it was said before, power, it's not thinking about the people, but it's about their power. And that's a sickness. It's a sickness. When we look at a man who's, going for Speaker of the House 15 times denied, I think I would have given up maybe after the 10th time. Something is wrong with him mentally in terms of wanting to grab that power. and realistically, he's really sold himself out to all these different factions. And so I do, I understand when we talk about mental illness as a medical term, but I do believe this, you have to have some type of mental illness to in order to grab for this power, not caring about who you hurt or what you do, and not living up to the standards that the people have set. Well, and maybe there are no more standards.
Mhm. Congressman George Santos, Mitt Romney at one point maybe summed it up. He said that George Santos, the Long Island congressman, was a sick puppy. I'm not sure if George Santos has much support. I think he's a cartoon character, and people pity him or feel sorry for him or whatever. At this point, Deborah Lynch, want to jump in?
Sorry, I had to unmute. It's funny because I think back to during 2016, and I was watching, the debates on both sides of the aisle. But I remember watching with my mom back then, the Republican debates. We watched them all. And I know you all remember it if you watched. I'd never seen in exchanges like that on stage between candidates, literally calling each other names. And so, and now I'm not saying the Democrats are better. I think it's just, I didn't see that as much between Hillary and Bernie. You saw different exchanges, but not name calling. I don't know at what point we have to engage people at a level where you cannot, you have to rise, you have to be a different level or a different caliber of person. I can guarantee you any of the elected officials on this call right now would never engage in activity like that. It just wouldn't happen. So to change that, I don't know if they get sound bites or they get Twitter blasts out of it, or their TikTok goes viral because of it. They're looking at it like any press is good press because it's getting my name out there and it's getting me donations from fringe people. So I don't know how to fix that. And then if you go back to the campaign finance problems, you literally have candidates that shouldn't be representing us. They just shouldn't be. They're not qualified. But because of the influx of the way people get their news today, I mean, my mother used to be so frustrated. I'd come home and she'd say, oh, we got to watch the news. And I'd say, well, here's what they're going to tell you. And because I already knew it based on social media and what was happening through the day. And she gets so frustrated because she didn't have this. And so it's also generational. She didn't have the ability and didn't want to do this. She didn't want to be on her phone. And then by the time the news rolled around, it was old news, but that's what she got her news from. She got it from a piece of paper that was delivered to the front porch and watching the news on TV. So, that's a hard thing to hold on to too. But people that are 40 and under, most of them are registering blanks because they're sick and tired of the two parties not solving problems.
I wanted to mention, Deborah Lynch, your mom, your late mom, Ruth Young, was an activist in this community for many, many, many years. And I just want to mention that just in case someone may not know, your mom and all the great work she did in the community. Dr. Joseph Kolosinski, I've been listening to all of this. You've been listening to all of it. Professor Kolosinski, politically, is America going to hell in a handbasket? Professor.
Well, I don't know how quickly handbaskets go, but actually, one of the things I was thinking of, particularly listening to Deborah earlier about Citizens United and thinking about some other stuff, is that this has been a long process, right? I mean, and there's an erosion of fairness, there's an erosion of truth that probably first thing I can think of is the Reagan administration getting rid of the fairness in broadcasting doctrine, where they had to air both sides, right? But then, you know, worst thing happened, like when Newt Gingrich was speaker. One of the things he did is he got rid of, I think it was called the Office of Technology Assessment, I think, which would you know, analyze things in a bipartisan way and come up with you know, numbers that everybody could agree on that they could work forward from. And he got rid of that, I think, largely because one side of the aisle didn't like the facts, and so they diminished them. And this is just, you know, this has just been growing to the point where you know, we're getting just, you know, blatant untruths. Well, particularly, it seems most particularly from the former president, but it's been a long process, and I not sure off the top of my head how we turn that back.
Thanks, Professor. By the way, if you hear someone speaking or addressing a point, feel free to jump in, okay, and share your viewpoint. Rodney Strange, you've been active for years in county government. At one point, you ran the Elmira School Board, very well known and visible in the community. I'm getting the impression that the political chaos nationally sometimes filters down to perhaps Chemung County, where it's the executive Chris Moss versus the county legislature and fighting and so forth. Is that a problem, or is that just something that I seem to be weaving out of thin air?
Well, I mean, obviously the last 4 years brought us into some new ground that we didn't have before. We actually overrode some vetoes of the county executive. I don't know if we ever did that with Tom Santulli. I don't think we did when I was on the county legislature with Tom for the first 8 years. You know, and he's vetoed some of the budgets and things like that. And we've had a lot of lawsuits. We've learned a lot about the county charter. I think if I had to hear the word county charter one more time during the last 4 years, I was going to scream. But everybody knows on the legislature what the county charter is. You know, I think sometimes, you know, it's a good thing to have some discourse, because then, you know, a lot of things come out in the discussion. So I think things are going better now. We have a new county chair of our legislature. We seem to be working together better. Hopefully things will continue to go that way. Things are looking up. You know, it was a contentious 4 years, but I think both sides have some blame to go around there. But certainly politics has changed on the local level as it has in the national level. And I just want to get back to the George Santos issue. I don't know how that guy ran for Congress 2 election cycles, lied about every single thing on his resume, and was not caught. No one picked up on anything. I mean, he literally lied about everything, and no one found this out. I mean, now it's like, you know, from January, from after he got elected until about a month ago, every day there was something new coming out that he lied about. I mean, where was anybody looking at his background? I mean, he literally made up his entire life and nobody caught it. I mean, and then these weren't just little white lies. I mean, these were major discrepancies in his life. And
actually, excuse me, but actually it was brought out, but the press refused to carry the stories. And that's really what happened.
It seems so bizarre to me that so much. I mean, if it was a little bit, I understand. Maybe the press would ignore it. But wow, I just don't know how somebody can run for Congress like that on a national level and nobody find out about it.
Can I weigh in, Dr. Coleman, on something that Reverend Wright said? He talked about political theater. And Deborah Lynch said, unqualified people. So we have a political theater with unqualified cast. So you get what we got. You get the liars, you get the cheaters, you get the deniers, because they are getting away with it. If the people who I would think would be good, respectable people would call them on the carpet and say, no more of this, we won't tolerate this, I think some of it would go away, but there's that rationalization going on. They try to rationalize the behavior and make bad behavior look good. We have to stop that nonsense, because if we start dealing with the people, if they deal with us publicly, we darn Q public. If we're doing some of these things, they lock us up, put us away, put us in the psych center or wherever we need to be. But on that level, they keep playing the role. And so until we get strong enough to have elected officials who will get off stage and stop playing roles and do their jobs and take a stand for what right and wrong, we will have all of this crazy behavior going on.
I'd like to jump in a minute, Steve. I think part of the problem, or maybe the problem, is that the quality of the candidates we've been talking about, virtually every job in the private sector, whether you're talking about a town justice or president of the United States, equivalent jobs pay far more in the private sector than we pay in the public sector. So people who are qualified are not necessarily willing to sacrifice their income and their family support to go ahead and be abused in public. We are all, as the Bible says, have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And so all of us have something in our past that we don't want to be made public. But if you run for public office, that nowadays they will dig and they will find it and they will do their best to humiliate you. And not only that, but you're going to become targeted by people who are absolutely insane. We've had so many assassination attempts of congresspersons, and even federal judges have been threatened and trying to kidnap a governor of Michigan. We have placed people who may be good qualified people who want to run. There isn't sufficient security for them. There isn't sufficient financial remuneration, so it's not a sacrifice. I'm not saying that you should make a lot of money and walk away a millionaire, but you shouldn't have to sacrifice your family's livelihood to do the right thing and run for public office. So if we want more qualified people, we have to pay better, we have to provide better security, and we have to do something about general acceptance of the fact that people are human.
I'd like to make
respond. Yep. Please, Deborah Lynch.
just real quick on that. I agree with everything that Susan just said. The only part I struggle with is the average net worth of a congressperson in this country right now is way more than they get paid. So something's going on also to make them want to get that role, to get the backroom deals they obviously are getting, which is another big problem in our political field.
Mhm.
So they run for power and they run for money. Trust me.
Mr. Lynch, what about the viewpoint that human nature is flawed? A lot of people are corrupt, they're scoundrels, and that's a major reason why the founding fathers, the three branches of government, the branches and the scoundrels could check and balance each other. Isn't that what we have right now, a government of scoundrels? And hasn't that always been the case? And isn't that why the founding fathers designed American government, the American political system as they did?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea behind our political system was, as what you just said, checks and balances. Some of the best conversations I had when I was running for ledge in the county was on doorsteps of Trump supporters. You know, there'd be a Trump flag hanging out and I knocked on their door because, you know, I wanted to talk to these people. And the reason they really gravitated towards him was because he spoke his mind. Now, sometimes that's good, that's bad, but they liked it because he flew in the face of what they perceive is hurting them. They're being taxed beyond, I mean, we fled England because we didn't want to be taxed like we're being taxed right now. I mean, most of us are paying between 30 and 40% of our income in taxes. And then if you throw in other taxes and enumerations that we pay, People are sick of it. They want these people that we elect to represent them, not the elite. And that's not at all what's happening. So
If I may step in,
Steve, go ahead.
thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that most of the people that I met, now you got to realize this was 1976, and I stepped into the 94th Congress, and a world was different back then. And the political interaction, there was always arguments, but nothing that turned this bitterly personal. The media was wildly different back then. But I wanted to say that I worked for 3 freshman members of Congress, a Democrat and 2 Republicans. And every one of them walked in the door with a sense of wanting to do what was right. There was a collegiality between the R's and the D's that has vanished. I attribute it mostly to the last con man we had in the White House. But I also wanted to say that when I got there, it was before staff on Capitol Hill were covered by fair labor practices or a bunch of other things. It was called the last plantation. And I watched 3 new members of Congress give in to the power and the enticements of that position. You become a virtual prince. And the money actually was and still is pretty healthy compared to what things are like here in the Southern Tier. But it's the power, it's the enticement, it's the special treatment that they get that they just don't seem to want to give up. And one little sidebar. I admitting to having been a Pollyanna, and I was brought up in a house in Bath, New York, was where my dad was a diehard Roosevelt Democrat, and my mother voted Republican just to cancel his vote. So I got a chance to make up my own mind pretty much. But when I left Capitol Hill to go to another one of those criminal type occupations as a lobbyist, when I left, I wanted to write the great American novel about how people change when they get into the special treatment that they get in Congress. I had the title of it, but I've never had the ambition to write it. The title was Elected and Presumed Lost. And I still feel that way, very honestly, that good people go there. But the enticements of the job, if you watch how many people, I've returned to retire here, and I keep running into people like me who are lifelong Republicans for, almost all their life. But these days are a little embarrassed. It's not because the politics here have changed. They certainly have changed on the national scale. And I don't think the party labels mean much anyway. And I want to finish this way, and then I'll shut up and let somebody else talk. But I want to read you a little warning that I found. Someone said at one point, and I'm going to quote now, political parties can become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be unable to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterward the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. So if you follow it back to people who say parties are the big problem, take it all the way back. That was in George Washington's farewell address in September of 1796, warning us that this kind of rancor could develop. And it bothers me. I spent my life in one party. When I came back to New York, I registered as an independent. And I find a lot of friends that feel that same way. It's generally an unhealthy embarrassment that the political system has come to this. I guess that's pretty much my summation, and it's sad to see. I'm not sure I agree with Tom, however, in thinking that there may not be a fix to it. Eventually, unless we go the Jonestown Act in this cult river we seem to be stuck in, people will come back to their senses, I think.
Steve Sprague, you have a unique set of credentials. Former congressional staffer for several congressmen, a former reporter, political reporter, background as a television journalist. Overall, has journalism let the American people down? We heard earlier that George Santos lied and lied and lied and lied, and no one called him on it, or at least not loud enough, because a lot of people didn't know, and a lot of stuff then came out. Has journalism in America let the American people down? And if so, why? Maybe not. Steve Sprague.
Well, let me say to start with that I would hope my colleague Jeff is champing at the bit to address this one too. Journalism, when I was an active journalist and we had 30 news people in the newsroom of the Star Gazette, or even just when Tom and I were together on Channel 36, we operated by a set of ethics, journalistic ethics. I always thought that when I retired from government, I'd like to go teach journalistic ethics, but nobody's asking for any class like that these days. The 24-hour news cycle, as we have seen recently with Fox News, the sellout, the absolute lying to follow the cult and keep the income. But back to George Santos, Jeff and I will both tell you that we know that he was revealed, he was unveiled, he was stripped bare of all of those stories by a small journalistic organization. And the big ones didn't bother to listen to them. So the lesson here is to listen to the journalists who are trying to tell you what they are. And the sadness recently is that journalist has, it's become a tawdry employment, apparently, if you listen to the advocates who don't want the truth to be told. So my set of careers, maybe I can take some credit for a couple of years in the military, but my set of careers, journalism, congressional staff, lobbyist for a blue collar organization, bus companies, and Homeland Security, a do-it-nothing bureaucrat, are not going to be very convincing. But those are the points that have been lost. And very honestly, I would invite all of you to join in the effort that I've tried to talk Dr. Coleman into joining with me and my colleague Tom to get more local news coverage on local government, because that's where people who should be responding across the country learn what they should be learning and become a little more acquainted with the product. Okay.
Thanks, Steve, for that. I want to mention also that I think when it comes to local news, most Americans trust local TV news than they do the national news. And I do think you get assemble a good team of reporters, shoe leather reporters that go out and get the stories. I've been very impressed at WETM, the relatively new news director at WETM, Jim Turpin, has hired a number of people, and they're going out and getting stories, and I think they're making a big difference. You're not going to find at this point the same stories in the traditional press, but you do find it on local TV news, and I think that's why the American people in general, and I think people in the Twin Tiers, trust local journalism. Wanted to bring George Santos, that situation, local news, what we've been talking about. Jeff Murray, Jeff, this is right up your alley. What would you like to say about what you've been hearing?
Well, I'd like to make several points, and I'd like to follow up on what my colleague Steve Sprague said, and one of them was he was talking about how he worked with a couple of freshman congressmen, and I had the pleasure of covering a freshman congressman, Amo Houghton, when he was elected in 1986. And that made me think about a couple of concerns that I have, and that's about, as somebody who's in the communications business, I see a couple of things that are raising red flags for me. One is the coarsening of the discussion. Two is the suppression of discussion or attempted suppression of discussion. I go back to, I look at, Amo Houghton was a Republican, but he wasn't a hyper partisan Republican. He was known for, reaching across the aisle, not to give in to the other side, but to say, how can we meet in the middle and do what's best for the people of our district and for the country? And he always preached civility. And I think that message has been lost. I think that when you've got people, I'm, as a journalist, as a communicator, I am all about and all in favor of open discussion. But, there's a point that when you're trying to shout over each other and lose that civility, then nobody's hearing the other person, and you're really not getting anywhere. And the opposite of that is when some people don't want to hear opposite points of view at all. They want to suppress that. And I totally disagree. As Voltaire said, I disagree completely with what you're saying, but I will defend to the death your right to say. And I agree too. I think Rush Limbaugh used to say, believe in debating in the marketplace of ideas. No matter what the idea was, get it out there, debate it openly, and the ideas that had the most merit would float to the top. Not, I don't like your idea, so you should be silenced. I don't believe in that. I hear a lot of opinions that I don't necessarily agree with, and I don't say I think those people should be silenced. I just turn the channel or read a different page in the newspaper or whatever. And as far as I'm concerned, they have just as much right to express their opinion as anybody else. So those things are both a concern to me.
Jeff, if I may make one quick remark.
Yeah.
Amo Houghton was not a standard everyday congressman like we know them. He went there as in the very classic patrician sense. He was contributing his public service. And we all know that the family, and Amo in particular, was such a generous and down-to-earth person. If we had 435 members of Congress like Amo, I'd be a happy camper. You know, I can go out and mow the lawn and think that the world is in proper order.
Well, Amos certainly did not go to Congress to get rich. So he already was rich, but he was one of the most down-to-earth people I ever met in my life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The other point I wanted to make real quick, it was talking about the media role, and I think there are a lot of journalists who are still old school and still, you know, they believe they want to play things right down the middle. They try and be fair. They try and present every side to an issue and present the facts as best as they understand them, and then let the readers or the viewers decide. I do see, and it's not just Fox News. A lot of different news outlets sometimes they present opinion and present it as fact or news. And it's not a Republican or Democrat thing. I've seen it on both sides. And obviously, news organizations, newspapers have opinion pages. TV networks have commentators, and that's fine as long as it's clearly marked. This person is a commentator. He's giving you his opinion. This person is a reporter. They're reporting the facts as they understand them and telling you what other people are saying about these facts. Sometimes those lines are a little blurred. And I think that's where people, at least from what I'm seeing, people start to lose faith in the media because they think people are giving them that journalists have an agenda. No matter what their political leaning, that's driving their reporting because they're trying to get their message across, their agenda promoted, instead of telling the people, as Walter Cronkite would say, that's the way it is.
But if I could jump in, one thing about the press, because here it is, the press is promoting a lot of these individuals, and the individuals are behaving this way so that they can be seen by the press. And people might say, hey, this guy Richard is always talking about black, blah, 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 blah. We don't trust the press because the press wasn't covering Black people during those time periods that you're even talking about. You guys can talk about the history and how you worked in Congress, so forth, so on, and that's good. But then too, there was no Black representation. And so when we see, and this is part of that sickness or that mental illness, locking out people. The press wasn't talking about gerrymandering, headlining, so forth, so on. And so it locked out a whole race of people. And I should say races because the Japanese, the Germans, the Jews, so forth, so on, the Japanese, so forth, so on, and Blacks. And so even the press was biased, and the press only wanted to do things that would sell papers. If that story was not going to sell papers, then they're not going to run it, regardless of how important it might be to society. Also, we all do have our own personal biases, And so therefore, reporters are reporting from their own personal bias. They've got to listen to their editors. They may write a great story, but the editor would say, well, that's not going to sell the paper. Or the news person, that's not going to be on the broadcast. And so, here again, the sickness of Congress is also who are the enablers. The press is a big enabler of their sickness. Only reason why they follow around Marjorie Taylor Greene, because she's going to say something foul, so forth, so on. And the one from Goldberg, and the one from Colorado. And so why are they getting all this getting seen in the press? And now the whole build up today is who's going to run for president. Where you have DeSantis, who is saying some very foul things, doing very foul things. Now he's going after Black fraternities and sororities and saying that they should not be on their campuses there in the state of Florida. this man gets to be president, they're trying to do that on the national level. So, where the whole thing about being woke, woke saying, hey, y'all are sleeping, you need to get on and see what's happening in our society today. And, here's another, thing of woke in terms of what's happening in Congress, how there is this illness within these Congress individuals, congressional people, in terms of power grabbing, money hungry, so forth, so on. And they're not seeing to the needs of what the local constituents are needing, or rather the people of their state, the needs of the people of their state.
Mhm.
Okay, Steve, if I could jump in here, I'd like to, say something about, because
Go ahead. Go
yeah,
ahead.
so I'm on, yes, I'm unmuted. But one of the things, and I forget who used the phrase of reporters going right down the middle, right? But one of the things that I think is a problem with the media is too much going right down the middle. There are issues where there really aren't two rational sides. There really aren't two valid arguments, right? I mean, to take it to an extreme, the flat Earth argument, it would be bad journalism to put on somebody to talk about how the Earth is flat and somebody to refute them, because there are facts and we need to work with those facts. And I think there's altogether too much of the media not actually assessing what's being told. They will give the two sides a microphone and just present both sides as being equal, whether they're equal or not. And I think a possible cause of this, and it sounds like WETM is doing some great local reporting, but newspapers are getting smaller, news departments are getting cut back. There are fewer and fewer people out there doing this kind of work that we need done, and that's a problem, right? This is a number of years ago now, but I had a friend who started working for the Lake City Reporter in Florida, and I drove through town, and because she was working on the paper, I picked up a copy of the paper and was amazed to see that she had written every single word on the front page, and most of the rest of the paper was stuff from the AP. There's a lot of places where there aren't the boots on the ground that are doing the kind of reporting that we need. And that leads to this sort of, let's call it lazy both sidesism, where we're not assessing what we're being told about things.
Anybody want to?
I'd like to, can I address that real quick?
Sure.
Yes, Mary.
I understand your point. You're saying there are, obviously there are issues where, if somebody approached me and say, hey, I believe in baby beating, I want to do a story about that. Obviously every sane person would say, well, that's not something that could be justified. Or if you were to say that I want to talk about why I believe Hitler was a great man, or clearly there are some topics, like you say, that anybody with any common sense would say there's not two sides to that. Most issues, and a lot of the issues that I deal with are not that cut and dried, and I personally, and as somebody who deals with this on a daily basis, I don't want to be the one to be in a position to decide, okay, I think this argument has more weight than that argument. Obviously, there is a reason that most newspapers and other journalistic outlets have an editorial page or commentators that let those people take apart and analyze issues and let them say, here's what I think you should think about this issue. Make it clear that this is their opinion. My job as a journalist is to present the facts as the best of my ability, as I understand them, and to get the opinions of the people who are stakeholders in that particular circumstance or topic, and and let the readers or the viewers decide for themselves. I'd like to think that most of our readers are fairly intelligent people, and if you present the facts, and try and present the whole picture as best as you can, that they can make up their own minds whether they think that issue, this person's argument is more valid than that person's argument. I don't want to be the one in most cases to make that decision. That would be me trying to influence what people think, and that's not my job. My job is to try and inform.
Fair enough, but okay. My example of the flat Earth thing was clearly reducto ad absurdum, but there are real issues. I mean, I used to spend a lot of time watching Sunday morning politics shows, and they would have politicians on. The politicians would say outrageous things, and they would frequently never even try to ask a follow-up question. And that's really the sort of thing I was alluding to, not putting an opinion where opinion wasn't warranted.
Well, that's not to say that if somebody says something that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, that I'm not going to challenge them on it.
Right.
But when all is said and done, when I sit down and say, okay, I've interviewed this person, I interviewed that person, I interviewed that person, I'm going to try and present what each side said as accurately as I can. During the interview process, if they say something that doesn't add up to me, I'll ask them a follow-up question. Can you, I don't understand why are you making that point, or why do you believe in that certain way? And then I will make note of that, and then the story will reflect that. This person says such and such, and here's why he believes that. This is why this person thinks that other person is wrong. And, here's the data we have to back up one side or the other. And, as a journalist, all I can do is try to present that as best as I can, sort of like an attorney making an argument in a trial. You present the facts, you present the witnesses, and the jury decides what they're going to believe, just like our readers.
I'd like to throw one last thought on that. As someone who fielded questions from journalists, as well as asking them, I'm very happy I had the experience of asking them before I went into that part of the business. But I can tell you that the most elusive of your targets out there will slough off an everyday journalist. Most of the journalists these days think that they're going to make big time, and so they're simply thinking of what their next clever question will be, while they ought to be listening to the answer. So I can tell you that a lot of times what you hear reported by a lazy journalist is what I will let you hear. It doesn't have to be true. It simply has to be plausible. And that goes back to the journalistic ethics and the training. And unfortunately, a lot of the young journalists I see these days are simply filling a blank on their way to the next job. And it doesn't feel, I hope it does to Jeff, because he's deeply in it. But it doesn't feel like it did 50 years ago, when journalism was, at least then, considered an honorable and necessary profession.
Yeah, much like politics.
It's frustrating because I see these surveys that say, what are the most hated or least trusted professions, and like was mentioned earlier, congressmen are down near the bottom. Journalists aren't very high above them, and it is frustrating, because I agree 100% with journalistic ethics and trying to. I think I have an important job, and other journalists have an important job. The First Amendment, it wasn't there just for window dressing, and so I take that seriously. And it is frustrating when a lot of people don't trust journalists because of what some other journalists, particularly at the major market level or the national level, some of them are doing things that make me cringe, and not all of them. There's still a lot of ethical, really sharp journalists out there, but the ones who sometimes stray from the straight and narrow give the rest of us a black eye.
Hmm. Yeah,
I think one of the, Dr. Coleman, if I could just say, I think one of the things that Tom Santulia said on one of the previous ones is that we spend so much time with breaking news, right? Everything cannot be breaking, right? At some point, the media's desire to be first overrides their desire to be correct, and to be factual. And given the 24-hour news cycle, given social media, given the fact that, as you pointed out in your opening, that everyone has an opinion. And so if you have a phone, if you have access to social media, everyone can be an expert. And so it kind of diminishes real journalism in a way, and journalistic ethics in a way, because I don't need you to filter the news. If I'm on scene, I can get the news from whoever I follow, whatever trusted source that I've deemed trustworthy, and that can certainly play a role in how I filter out regular, normal means of media and journalism.
I would just like to weigh in just for a minute to say, in terms of the news, we're inundated with negative news 24/7. Somebody would commit a crime or something negative, it's on 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, every day and all. And somebody do something good. I'll pick on my brother, Reverend Wright. If T did something really good in Ithaca, we're here at one time. Reverend Wright did this and Ithaca was really well. And then somebody would call you and say, did you get that? No, because it never come back on again. But that negative stuff, and there are politicians who really go out of their way. Like that one lady would say, let's burn down the Capitol. Well, she knows that the media will go crazy on that nonsense. I would cover her one time and put her to bed. So, I mean, if we stop feeding into that craziness, they would have to go to another level, and they might go to a level where they can get locked up. So I don't know, because some of them won't stop, because if you don't cover them at one level, they go to another, but maybe that's okay. We might get rid of them. But I wish we could get more positive news. We are people. I'm a positive person, and I would like every day, I wish I could hear one positive thing from the news that has occurred in my city or in my town or in my state. And we don't get that. But if it's negative, every time you turn on the news, if it's on 3 times a day, that article will be on the news. So I just, to the news people, I don't know what you can do with that, because you work with other people and they might tell you to do that. But some of us like out here would like to hear something positive much more frequently than we do.
Georgia, there's an old saying in news, and I'm sure Steve Sprague knows it: if it bleeds, it leads.
I know.
And unfortunately, to a large extent, that's true. And I've got to tell you, I often will make an effort to search out positive stories like you talked about, for my own mental health, because I write plenty of the other kind. Believe me, I write a lot about stories about crime and corruption and people losing everything in fires and car crashes and those kind of things can bring you down. So when I've got an opportunity to write a nice humorous or quirky or offbeat story or heartwarming story, and sometimes people will respond to those stories. And just last year, I did a story about not a real hard news kind of story, but about this dog that ran away from its family and was gone for 14 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then it turned up 40 miles away, just, pure happenstance that somebody happened to find it. They got it back to his family. It was a story with a happy ending. And that story got thousands of page views. It was one of my most read stories of the year. And like I said, it wasn't anything that was earth shaking. It wasn't going to change anybody's lives, but it was a feel good kind of story, and people responded. And stories like that, like I said, it's almost like a palate cleanser for me. It gives me a chance to get a little bit of a break from some of those more depressing kinds of stories.
Well, thank you. Keep it up.
Ladies and gentlemen, NBC during the week in their NBC Nightly News has something called Inspiring America. And they do something about folks that inspire, that are doing good things and so on. And that's a regular feature on NBC News. I think what happens sometimes is there are so many negative stories in the news that they drown out stuff that's positive. So even if there's positive things, you don't think of the positive stories that are run every evening and so forth. One problem, though, is that news, in some cases, has been weaponized and has been commodified. Think of Fox News. Fox News panders to an audience to get ratings and sell advertising time. And we're hearing more and more. There's a court case about Fox News and Fox News personalities such as Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity lying to the viewers about Donald Trump. You know, they're upset and don't like Donald Trump, and they know the election wasn't stolen, but they're telling their audience the exact opposite because that brings in the numbers, the ratings with the conservative audience. So talk about folks not trusting. The interesting thing is that a lot of folks, many folks, but be careful here, many folks that watch Fox News don't care about the truth. As long as they are told something that they want to believe, they'll believe it and defend it and so on. So that's a real problem. It's not only Fox News, it's other outlets also, but it's a sad day, in American journalism and so forth. Tom Santulli, commentator and analyst. Tom, haven't heard from you for a while. I want to bring you back in just to get your reaction to all of this. Tom?
Well, I would go back to where we started when we want to talk about why we like and why we don't like politicians and are we crazy or whatever. I've always felt this way. And I think it's, when you say there's 435 people in Congress, there's 4 people that run Congress, period. It's Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer in the Senate. And then when you go into the House, when you got new with Kevin now is new to it. When Nancy Pelosi was there, did she allow for just everybody to, she was a general and a very successful general and well respected, but you never did anything unless you had her okay. And it's no different with Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer in the Senate. And then you add to that, right now what's going on in the country, as much as people didn't like Donald Trump, and I was a guy who didn't particularly care for him, I just saw today that Joe Biden's approval rating fell to 37%, the lowest that's ever been, and one of the lowest in history in modern presidency. And I look at that and go back to where I always start. We're starving, I still believe, for somebody to step up to be a leader who, when the majority of Democrats say they don't want Joe Biden to run again, and the majority of Republicans say that they don't want Donald Trump to run again, who do we talk about all day about running again? Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and I think, and that's media driven. Fox News, quite frankly, there's two sets of news out there. There's the people that give the news. At nighttime, nobody's giving the news. Those are political shows on all those network stations. Those people have their own ideas, their own thoughts, and people flock to listen to them. I just think it's shameful that many people are so easily influenced by some of these folks. And I keep going back. We haven't had a president in a long time who I think that people felt really comfortable with, that people trusted. When you see that 71% of the public don't trust the national media, they don't think they tell you the truth, and Congress has an 18% approval rating. These are the obstacles that I think that somehow, but it takes people, and the other thought that's in my mind, the reason Santos never was investigated, because nobody ever thought he was going to win. He was kind of a joke candidate. I've talked to people down there. they were shocked when Santos won. I mean, the guy that said he went to Harvard and never even went to college. I mean, are you kidding me? And somebody must have known that. You know, they wrote him off. So I just think there's so much work to do. And until we find somebody, because I think the president's position really does set what a country is all about. And we just haven't had somebody like that in a while that people could look to and I think have a good feeling about. Somebody they felt it was really, it's unfortunate. Guys, the most powerful position in the world. And we just can't seem to get somebody to gravitate to that position that people could fall behind and work together. It's pretty pathetic.
Anybody want to jump in and follow up?
Yeah, actually, go ahead, Susan. I've spent more time talking, so.
That's all right. I just wanted to say, though, that Fox News, my understanding, is the most successful cable news organization right now. So when we talk about mainstream versus not mainstream, and, you know, though Trump lost the election, he got a lot of votes. I think there needs to be acknowledgement that, you know, as did Hillary Clinton when she ran, there needs to be the acknowledgement that there's a real divide in this country, and it's about 50-50. And there seems to be, even here tonight, sort of a paradigm that, you know, the other side isn't quite sane, or that they aren't quite, people shouldn't be listening to them. But yet when you have the most successful cable news show, that's a lot of people listening. And if a lot of people are listening to what is perceived to be the wrong thing, there's something very wrong with the country that they're not hearing from other people. They're not hearing the real answers, the real solutions, that it's not touching their hearts in a way that they want to listen to. And so I think that's something that other journalists that perceive themselves as more mainstream perhaps need to take a look at and see what they're missing, that so many people are flocking to these programs.
I have to disagree a little bit. I think Tom is exactly on point. People listen to what they want to hear. You know, however he developed the cult, however he developed the following, Mr. Trump has a very large following. You know, I object because, as the Pollyanna I admit I am, I try to hold honesty, to reject bullies, and to try to put away with journalistic talent, if that's at all possible, those people who are detrimental to the overall, what I believe to be the overall good. Because Fox makes the most money, we've seen in the last couple of weeks how they made the most money by patently lying to and pandering to the crowd that they know is bringing the money in. And so, you know, I just go back to my youth and say, I wish that we could all have a president, and I don't care what party he is, I care about who he is, and whether he deserves the respect. I have two grandsons. One is 16 now. One is about to be 7. But I always think of the president as somebody I hope will be a role model for that person. And, you know, the fact that Biden has very low approval ratings, still, you know, the parties themselves have gone through some pretty tough times finding the right candidates, and then the candidates for the right reasons. But I'm all in favor. I'll be quiet and say, Tom, you're right. We need the leader that's going to bring this country back to center and logic.
That would be wonderful. But actually, a couple of people have mentioned Biden's approval rating. And the thing that, and I spend a lot of time looking at these, the thing I find amazing about Biden's approval ratings is just how stable they are. They bounce back and forth between a pretty narrow range, and it was largely the same for Trump. And this is one of the things that is at the heart of what we're talking about, because these are no longer driven by who these people are and what they're doing and what their public performance is. We have our camps, and we trust the guy that's in our camp, and we don't trust the guy who's in the other camp. And and so these things stay hidden because the day-to-day facts just aren't moving them that much. I mean, that's actually a sign of the problem that we're talking about here.
I'll have to reflect to back into 2020, and my neighbors, they had a sign on their lawn. It said, "Vote for the policies, not the personality." And they were talking about Trump. Vote, saying, hey, and a lot of people like the policies that the Republicans were putting forward. And they ignored the other things, the personality of this man and how he was really destroying the country, dividing the country. And so we have to really start looking at the total package in terms of the person's personality, their behavior. Are they going to be a good leader? Will people follow them because they reflect good? They reflect the ideals of the country, of the Constitution, not one who wants to get rid of it so that they become king, but one who wants to really follow what the U.S. Constitution represents, what a democracy really is. And if the person's personality is not matching that, even though the policies might be, then we have to say no to that individual.
That's cool. And I would think that the other leg to kind of journalistic and media misinformation is then voters are misinformed, right? And so a misinformed electorate, as Georgia and Tom talked about, kind of voting being a part of what makes this democracy work. It also then, not only do we need informed voters, but we also need to figure out a way to allow more people to vote. And Tom talked about us as a nation, showing up poorly at the polls. But we've also rolled back some voter protections. We've also put in more laws that hinder people from voting. Immediately after Section 5 of the Voter Rights Act was rolled back, 14 states immediately put in fairly, in my opinion, toxic restrictions to voting, right? And so what do we do with an uninformed electorate that will turn out in low numbers, that may be disillusioned by both parties, and then the restriction of voting? And so if more people were given the franchise, then perhaps our numbers would not be as low as they are, and maybe these elections would not also be as close as they are, right? If you go by the electorate, certainly we appear to be extremely divided, right? Just almost as Susan pointed out, right? This stuff is very close. Though popular vote in the past two presidential elections hasn't really been as close as the electoral college results that seem to indicate. But I think we can't divorce kind of the media's role in terms of informing people and the uninformed electorate and how that shows up, and then all of the other ways that voting has been chipped away at by intentionally, in my opinion, from certain populations.
Why don't you just go back at this point?
Can I add something on that?
Decades and decades. The fact that most people most of the time don't vote is nothing new. There was a book written decades and decades and decades ago called The Semi-Sovereign People. The author of that book was a fellow named E.E. Schatzsnyder. And he pointed out that most folks, most of the time, don't vote. When they do vote, there's something that draws them to vote. He said that nothing draws a crowd like a fight. And he said politically, if there's something that riles up people, then they'll vote. Otherwise, they won't. So somehow this idea that, whoa, all of a sudden most people aren't voting is par for the course in American politics. Unless something really riles up the voters, then they seem to flock to the polls more than they otherwise would. Question: American politics, has it gone insane? So far, listening to all this, I think it has. I think it has gone insane. You know, what other conclusion can you draw from this discussion? What say you, folks?
I want to weigh in just a minute, Dr. Coleman, in terms of the political playing field. We need to revisit how we enter the playing field. Some of us are so locked into riding the elephant or riding the donkey. We don't check out the best qualified person for the roles that we're talking about. Well, let's say president. We've been elephants all of our lives, or donkeys all of our lives. So we'll take the donkey, we'll take the elephant, but we need to start looking at the best person for America, the best person that meet the needs of the people. We have this party loyalty, so much so that we overlook all the red flags that we see in the candidates, and we vote for them anyway because it's part of our party. If we can get out of that, because it's getting crazy in there, like I think it was Tom or somebody said, many people are going independent. They are sick of riding those two characters, the donkey and the elephant, when they are not taking us where we want to go. So I believe it's time for us to revisit how we do, because see, the people have the power. We sit here and talk about all of these folks, but we vote those people into office. Think about it. We vote them. They won't get there if we didn't vote them in. So we need to revisit our behavior. What can we do as we the people to make a difference in terms of rearranging the playing field? So I am just tired of what I see out there running around, people who are not qualified to do anything, but we put them there, then we complain for 12 months about this character that we put on the playing field and they cannot hit the ball. So let's not put them in the game. Let's start thinking about that. We're sort of programmed to do what we're doing, because many times we don't even know some of the candidates on our ballot, but they are Democrats, so we check them all. They're Republican, we check them all. We have to better educate ourselves. We have to tune in and get better acquainted with who we're voting for and what do they bring to the table. Some of them are not bringing anything to the table. They're just bringing empty dishes, and we're sitting there filling them for them. So I just hope that it's going to be a wake-up call somewhere along the way where we can say enough is enough, and let us take over the playing field and rearrange how the game is played.
And and that's not only on the local level, national level, but it must be also looked at on the local level. Because when I think about what's happened in North Carolina A&T University, which is a historically Black college, university, the students were able to vote there on campus in the library. And what did a North Carolina legislature do? She introduced a bill to eliminate the voting in that in the library. What was her rationale? Well, because it may bring danger to the students. Well, and to me, underneath that rationale, we do have voting machines inside our public schools, and we've had more shootings in the public schools, and yet none in the library at A&T. And so therefore, we look at what's happening with the gerrymandering. So on our local level, we have to look at who are we voting for as our state legislators. And if they're not representing us and our ideals and views, Florida legislature, when we look at what they're doing, particularly with Ron DeSantis yelling this woke, being woke, so forth, so on. The people on that local level, they need to get rid of those their state legislators, vote them out, saying, hey, if you're not representing me, I mean, they didn't care whether Disney World had its own little municipality, but yet this became a national thing, or rather a thing for the state with the governor. So the people on the local levels, we have to start looking at our politicians there. They may not be, getting all the publicity throughout the state, but they certainly are doing a lot of damage. So we do have to look at how we're voting, where we're voting, the gerrymandering that's taking place, particularly when it becomes time for the census in which they use to do the gerrymandering. So we have to look at all these issues and take action.
I was looking at a recent survey about woke, and it seems that most Americans are comfortable with the word woke. They think that people that are quote unquote woke are enlightened, more so than ignorant. And so Republicans are trying to demonize the word woke, and I think they are succeeding to some extent. But most Americans aren't buying it. They're not buying what the Republicans are selling in this case.
Well, we hope so. So far.
Steve, I'd like to walk down the street with you and stop people and ask them what the word woke is. I bet you 90% of them couldn't give you a definition of what it is. You know, when I hear about all the woke, most people.
Tom Santulli, very quickly, you're an expert. What summarize what the word woke means.
Well, let me just say this, Steve. I think part of the problem is I don't think that most people have any idea of. I've had woke explained to me 50 different ways. Hey, different people. Their interpretation of the word.
Professor Kolosinski, Professor Joseph Kolosinski, the word woke. What does that mean to you?
What does that mean to me? I think it's a sense that there are problems in the world, and it's up to us to address them.
Well, no disrespect. I bet you if I went down the street tomorrow, that wouldn't be what I would hear. I'm just telling you. I just find it to be one of these things where there's 1,000 interpretations what it is to be woke.
I don't doubt it, but a lot of that's being driven by the fact that certain segments of the political community are turning that into a scare word, like liberal or socialism or populist.
Depends on what street you walk down.
Exactly right.
They're making it negative. Woke can be a positive thing. You're awake. You can see. You're alert.
That's
you
right.
can do things. If you are asleep, you are out of it because you're asleep. So they've used the word. They don't even know the meaning of the word. And it just kind of humorous because they were asking Judge Brown, the determined woman, wanted her to define what is woman, and they don't even know what the word woke is. And I said, Lord, help us.
Exactly.
Can I say one thing? Rodney, I want to talk about the last election that you had here in legislature in the county. I brought it to the Democratic committee that we should actually endorse some Republicans running that didn't have Democrats running because of what was happening at the legislative level here. And I got shot down because they weren't Democrats. See, and to me, that's short-sightedness. They should be supporting the Republican that maybe would reach across the aisle.
We actually had some Republican legislators support Democrats incumbents.
I know that. I agree. And that's what should have happened. So I fought for that and got shot down. And Doctor, one thing real quick, you asked for solutions. To me, a good solution is ranked choice voting. We need to install ranked choice voting across this country and not base it on party at all.
I think approval voting is better than ranked choice voting, but ranked choice voting would be a huge improvement over what we've got right now.
Perfect.
One last thing I want to say, Dr. Coleman. Couple of people talked about Congressman Houghton and talking about parties and all. I voted for the man every year he ran. He was the best we could have had. So that's what we're talking about when Deborah mentioned candidate. You look for the best representative you can find in your community and go for it. But we're so locked into, for lack of better terminology, craziness. We'll just go along to get along. So I just say to us, it's time to wake up. We talk about woke. That is all.
Congressman Houghton was a great congressman, and he was very independent. One thing I want to point out, though, he had lots of money to be independent. He didn't have to grovel to get campaign contributions like so many other politicians do, and those politicians along the way get tarnished. So I think that's important. Amo Houghton, a great man, but also he had lots of money to be independent, and sometimes he took a stance that was contrary to his party stance. Wanted to mention, you've been watching the 31st Political Pundit Night exclusively on mytwintiers.com. Next Pundit Night is Thursday night, July 20th from 7 until 9. Special events on Saturday afternoon, May 13th, a Twin Tiers Unity in the Community Rally at Centerway Square in Corning to celebrate what brings us together rather than what keeps us apart. And I'm co-sponsoring this event with the Elmira Corning branch of the NAACP. I want to thank the executive producer of this program, Dennis Sweeney, WETM executive co-producers, David Sorensen and Lisa Sturdivant. One other thing I want to mention is every year the Elks Club has something called College Night, where different colleges go to the Elks Club and the admissions representatives talk to potential students of any age. And that's going to be on Wednesday, May 10th at the Elks Club in downtown Elmira. Please keep your eyes and ears open for that. There'll be more about it. But that date is going to be May 10th, College Night at the Elks Club. I wanted to thank the folks that gave their time this evening, shared their time for the betterment of the community, in my opinion. Dr. Richard Dozier, author, pastor, educator. Susan Betz-Detoma, attorney and pastor in Corning. Rodney Strange, Chemung County Legislator, 15th District, a Republican. Deborah Lynch, political activist and environmentalist. I also want to recognize her late mom, Ruth Young, who was a wonderful person and a great activist in the community. Steve Sprague, former congressional staffer, former Star Gazette reporter, and former local television journalist. It's great to have Steve here. I hope after experiencing this firsthand, you'll do it again. Georgia Verdier, Elmira Corning NAACP president. Dr. Joseph Kolosinski, associate professor, Elmira College, also a political analyst par excellence. Tom Santulli, former Chemung County executive, who walks his dog almost 2 or 3 times a day at least in West Elmira. Reverend Nathaniel Wright, pastor, Calvary Baptist Church, Ithaca, and former pastor of the Friendship Baptist Church in Corning. And Jeff Murray, veteran journalist for the Star Gazette and the USA Today Network. Boy, this 2 hours went very quickly. Again, I want to thank all of you for participating. My name is Dr. Stephen Coleman, and we'll be back with the 32nd Political Pundit Night. It's hard to believe coming up, and we'll be here before you know it, as I mentioned. So keep here at mytwintiers.com. Next Pundit Night, Thursday night, July 20th from 7 until 9. Thank you, all of you, for being on the panel. And thank you for the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that watch this. We couldn't do it without you. I want to thank WETM, Next Star Broadcasting, and thank all the folks that make this possible and make this successful. Have a good night, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Good night, Steve.